Hello, explorers. Welcome to Reach the World's Explorer program. For 25 years, Reach the World has inspired youth to become curious, confident, and compassionate global citizens through virtual exchange. My name is Tim, and I'm so glad you're joining us for today's live stream event. Today, our live virtual exchange journey to Brazil with explorer Madison Clark is coming to an end, sadly. Madison is a Fulbright U.S. student program researcher who has been traveling all over Brazil, conducting research on a fascinating chapter of U.S. and Brazilian history. And if you've been reading her wonderful virtual exchange articles, you know a lot about that already. Madison is now back home in the U.S., and she's joining us live today to talk about her final days in Brazil, her return journey, and of course, what is next for Madison. Let me say a quick welcome to the teachers and students who are joining us live today. We've got a great class on camera later for Q&A, and we also have others who are joining us on YouTube. If you are watching on YouTube, use that chat bar to let us know you're here, where you're joining from, and of course to share any questions you have for Madison as we go. We'll get to as many questions as we can in the next 45 minutes or so. And with that, I would love to bring Madison back on screen and welcome her back to Reach the World. Hello, Madison.
Hello. Oh, how are you? Thank you so much.
I am great. It is wonderful to see you. It's wonderful to see you. We have a little bit of an audio delay here today, but we'll make it work. Hello.
Hi, yeah, sorry about the delay. It's wild that when I was closer to the Amazon, my connection was better. And now that I'm in Midwest USA, my connection is not so great, but you know, whatever.
So the mysterious world of internet connections. We're glad you're here today. Thanks for joining us. Instead of trying to sort of pass it back and forth a lot, I'm just going to turn it over to you and bring your slides up and let you dive right into it.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. And hello, everyone else that's joining today. So as we just said, I'm back in the United States here in Indiana, but I do want to share with you my last few weeks or so in Brazil, how that went, and how it's been adjusting back into the United States and some of the challenges I've had, along with my plans for what I do with this research now. So the first slide I want to share is just a picture of a treat I gave to myself. The cake says parabéns, which is Portuguese for congratulations. I got this little treat for myself on November 19th because it marked 9 complete months of me being in Brazil. I'm sorry, November 18th. I got on November 18th, 9 complete months in Brazil. And what's even more special is that I went to the supermarket to get this cake and this wine. What's so special about the supermarket? Well, usually I would get my weekly foods or whatever I need from like nearby vendors. So it was like within walking distance. But this day I was like, I'm going to go to the supermarket. I have to take an Uber to get there because it's kind of a ways from my rural countryside setting that I was. But I wanted to treat myself. So I had to get an Uber and then go into the market, which was a very different experience from the month I had been just kind of going to local vendors and whatnot, getting the food and produce and vegetables that I needed. But yeah, so I was able to get this cake, celebrate with a little bit of wine to toast the end of my adventures in Brazil, which were numerous. But aside from just the toast and the cake that I got for myself that day, I also brought back some really fun gifts and souvenirs. On the next slide, you'll see a picture of Polly. So Polly is named after São Paulo. Polly. It's a little bunny rabbit that one of my friends got me while I was studying in São Paulo. And we got it on Avenida Paulista, which is like one of the famous streets in the city, super long, probably the most commercialized settings with McDonald's, Burger King, Pizza Hut, these kind of things and brands we recognize from the United States, alongside what Brasileiros or Brazilians would recognize even if they had no knowledge of the U.S. So, you know, a very famous street. There was a mall on the street, and my friend got me little Polly as a little keepsake and reminder for my travels in Brazil. Another gift on the next slide. This is a wrap from Salvador, Bahia. It's a imagine a very long, big, wide scarf, pretty thin. You could almost use that like a wrap, like if you're going for your swimsuit on the beach or maybe for your hair. And my host in Bahia, in Salvador, Bahia, got this gift for me as a little memento reminder. The family I stayed with there, they were very sweet. There was a woman and her elderly parents. They were 90 and 91 by the time I left Brazil, which I thought was fascinating and amazing. And they were still very mobile, still very athletic and energetic. The secret, they say, is to stretch every day. So stretch every day, and apparently that leads to longevity. So this was just a wrap that they gave me as another parting gift for my time in Brazil. Another gift I got on the next slide are these bracelets. It's one bracelet with many loops, and it's actually in honor of a particular Orisha. Oh, it's an Orisha. An Orisha, if you aren't familiar, are these different type of deities or in the spiritual sense when it comes to candomblé and traditional West African faiths. And so Orishas can come in many different types of protections, and they have different responsibilities. For example, these colors, black and red, are for the Orisha Exu. And this Orisha is responsible for like human balance, right? So this is a gift that someone gave me after they gave me a massage while I was there. And so this was just kind of a gift and memento for like memory and balancing your body and your system as protected by the Exu Orisha, excuse me. So yeah, and I think, the next slide I have was a gift I got for myself. There was a vendor in Sao Paulo who would sell his artwork. And every day on my way to the metro, he would be out, calling for people to buy his work. And every day I would pass by, he would say, Mina Reina, my queen, my queen. And I would kind of look and, not really buy anything, but I decided, I'll finally get something for myself. And I couldn't decide which one to get. So the vendor got this one for me. He picked it and he's like, this is you, basically. And so I agreed because she's beautiful. And so that's a picture that I have yet to find where to hang it in my apartment here, but hopefully soon she'll have a new home on my wall. So as you can see on the next slide, I got all my gifts, all my belongings. This is the night before I left in Belém, in Pará, in the northern part of Brazil. All my suitcase and belongings all packed up, ready to go. All my gifts, my souvenirs, my trinkets. But before I left the neighborhood I was in, I was so grateful for the community I had built, whether it have been, vendors and sellers I was familiar getting fruit from, or if it was the little elderly woman that was selling pastels to help raise funds for a church. So like the day before I left, I just kind of went around and just tell everyone my goodbyes, bought my last bits of goodies from them, or donated whatever Brazilian currency I had left over because I didn't really have a need for it anymore. So I just really gave it to whomever, most of them to my elderly woman friend because she was so sweet and tender. But yeah, so it was me pretty much kind of thanking everybody for their time, for their perspectives, gaining an understanding of how not only Brazilian life differs in the North, than the Southeast, but also just getting the perspectives of race and culture in general when it comes to Brazil. In this part of Brazil that I was in towards the end, there weren't a lot of people of my pigment, my skin tone, but there weren't a lot of white people either. So everyone was considered, whether it's a brown or parda or pardo, so this kind of in-between space, not black or white. And that gave a lot of insight and perspective when I had these interviews with people, when it came to their ideas of race and history, race today, and the response people have when even talking and studying about history and race, which I'm hoping will contribute to my research. For those who may not be familiar or may have forgotten or whatnot, my research focuses on how Afro-Brazilians responded to this era called embracamento or whitening, particularly with these Confederate families who left the United States after the Civil War to live in Brazil so they can continue their Dixie way of life, particularly because Brazil still had slavery going on during that time. The U.S. abolishes slavery in 1865. Brazil doesn't abolish till 1888. It is actually one of the last countries in this hemisphere to do so. So, one in the Western hemisphere to do so. So a lot of my research, was spent time in archives and whatnot, of course, looking at different newspapers, journals, diaries, these sorts of things to get a perspective and understanding. But I also wanted to interview people to see how aware they are of this history of this kind of racial understanding and identity, and how their understanding contributes to whatever Black erasure continues into today. Because essentially that was the goal back in the late 1800s, to whiten the country because of the large Black population. So since I kind of built a connection with these people during this time, I wanted to, say my parting words and goodbyes before I just took off, not to see them again probably for several years. So my next picture is the last snack I had while I was in Brazil. This is a coxinha. We might have talked about this a little before, but essentially it's like he has the fried kind of pastry outside, but inside it has like any kind of meat you want with like cream cheese. And so this one is a frango, so it's chicken coxinha with different cream cheese inside, and then some gummy bears, Brazilian brand gummy bears. And as you can see, it's at the airport, Loja do Aeroporto, on the little napkin there. So this was kind of I got to the airport in time enough to kind of have my little last Brazilian meal, kind of like my little goodbye and thank you to the country as a whole. But even in the airport, I had some challenges, right? The day I left was November 20th, which in Brazil is known as like a Day of Consciousness, Day of Black Consciousness. And it's in honor of this famous enslaved man who was responsible for what's called a quilombo. And these are like spaces where enslaved people would run away and create their own communities, kind of like they did in the U.S. with Maroons, if you're familiar with those. These would happen in Brazil. So lots of enslaved people would run away and create their own communities called quilombos. And this particular man on November 20th is honored. His name is Zumbi. He's honored for being a famous leader for one of the most long-lasting quilombos that lasted for a little close to 100 years before it unfortunately was invaded and destroyed. So November 20th is in honor of that day, and it's Day of Black Consciousness. But even on that day, when I'm in the airport, I was yet again racially profiled. The security asking me why I'm at the airport, what am I doing there? Asked me, if it was true that I was really flying, where was I going? Let me prove it. All these sorts of invading questions that he didn't feel the need to ask the other people in the line. But just a reminder of just how ingrained these sort of ideas of prejudice are throughout the globe, throughout the African diaspora. Where there has been a history of enslavement or belittling people who are darker in skin color. But I got out. My plane was late, but I made it. Made it out of Berlin to Sao Paulo for my connecting flight, and then taking that all the way for another 9.5 hours or so to Atlanta. And the next picture, you see me arriving in Atlanta.
Before we go into the next slide, can I ask you to translate what the rest of the napkin says?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. So, Loja do Aeroporto, store of airport. Gente que coopera cresce. It's like we happy to cooperate. Always. Oh, happy for always cooperating. Depois de bom café, uma boa viagem. Like after your meal, have a good flight. Obrigado, thank you, and return again, or always come back. So yeah. I may have to look up coopera. I may have gotten that word wrong. Okay, but yes, so this is me. This is the first picture I took outside of the Atlanta airport. And I'm excited because my friend is coming to pick me up to take a hot shower. I had spent 9 months in Brazil and did not have hot shower for most of that time. I think I took a total of maybe 4 or 5 showers that had hot water during that time period. So outside of those 4 or 5 times for the 9 months, I had cold water, and I did not like that. And washing my hair in cold water, I didn't like that either. So my friend is about to pick me up from the airport, and the first thing we're doing is taking me to another friend's house where I can take a hot shower for about an hour. I think I stayed in the shower because it was just so amazing to feel that again. And also just being able to freely speak English again. I even forgotten some words at some point when I was on the airplane coming back, because one of the flight attendants, they're coming around with their snacks and meals and beverages. And at one point, this one attendant, even though some were bilingual, right? Some weren't, they were only English speaking. And one English speaking flight attendant comes to me and she's asking like what kind of juice that I wanted. And automatically I said, suco de laranja. And she's like, what? And I was like, oh, wait. And I couldn't remember the word for juice. Like, I'm like, how do I say orange juice? Like, I was like, I had to stay for a second, like, suco de laranja, suco de laranja. I know I'm saying it right. I was like, no, it's like, how do you say it in English? So I did have those moments of like, all right, how do I speak in English? How do I behave in these US settings? When you go to a restaurant, you have to wait for a host to sit you, as opposed to in Brazil where you just sit wherever. So it's like those little fun adjustments, getting back to life here in the States. And on the next slide, you'll see another fun surprise that I had. Welcome home. So my home is in Montgomery, Alabama. So I flew into Atlanta, met my friends there, took a hot shower. It was great. And then I get back home to Montgomery at my dad's house, and he had this waiting for me, which is really sweet. Of course, I love cakes and sweets and whatnot. And having that kind of welcome back home to Montgomery was very nice. Kind of to help, I don't know, readjust back to being in a place where everything felt very new and very big, very new and very new to me, coming back to the US where everything was familiar, but also different at the same time. And yes, Kelly, I think you're correct with that translation as far as cooperation and growing. Could I say, yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, sorry about that mistranslation. And thank you for that correction. But yeah, coming back into the US and seeing how things are different in the sense of being very plentiful. Everything here feels very plentiful from when I left. Things feel very wide and very open and big, like when I'm on the road, or even when I'm in houses. Spaces feel very open and wide and big. Things feel very sweet and very salty when I eat them now. Like I feel like I've already gained at least, some weight since I've been back in the United States, which is fine because I love the food I'm eating. But it's also like when I took my first bite, I think of some ham when I got back to the States. My face just like shriveled up from it being so salty. And even when I had the cakes here in the picture, my face is like, oh, it's so sugary compared to the cake you saw on the first slide with the parabens on it. So yeah, that's been a different adjustment. Also, just the size of like cups, drinking cups back in Brazil would be maybe that big on average. And now I'm back in the States and as small as like this big. And I'm just like, oh my gracious, was I always drinking this much? Was I always, So that's been a very fun adjustment getting back to. And of course, again, just remembering to speak in English at times. But the next picture shows, of course, there are, some things I have been craving and longing for. This is probably the most American meal I could think of to eat when I get back home. So I was craving corn dogs. I was craving Pop-Tarts. I already had my Reese's waiting for me, so I had that too. But yeah, this was like the most American thing I could think of to enjoy. And when I ate it, I couldn't even eat all of it. I couldn't eat all of this on the plate, but just taking those bites like brought back this nostalgic feeling of like, yes, this was childhood. Okay, now I'm starting to feel a little bit more comfortable being back home. So that's always that's always fun to give those adjustments. But then there are new other things, like on the next slide, that aren't so great, like the weather. So I'm back here in Bloomington, Indiana, where it's a little bit colder than this now, actually, today. I think today it's about maybe, I think when I woke up it was 20 something. I don't know. But this is not, I'm not a fan of this. Like, coming from an environment where it was like 105 when I left, and then now I'm in this space where it's, 30s and cloudy and rainy, as opposed to the sunny, sometimes a little brief rainy, in northern Brazil. It's definitely, reminding me how I need to dress again, right? Wearing sweaters again and socks again and full pants again, as opposed to dresses and skirts. So that's not the funnest adjustment, but necessary. Um, on the next slide, there are other wonderful surprises that came back to my department, the African Diaspora Studies Department here in Indiana. They had a little get together for me, which is nice. So again, more sweets, more cakes, to welcome me back, and just have that sort of community building again, and telling people about my academic, professional, and personal experiences. Speaking of personal experiences, on the next slide shows a dear beloved of mine that I made, a partner that I made in Sao Paulo. His name is Flavio. And I know everyone hears his name and starts laughing. Yes, Flavio. Sounds very similar to Fabio, but it's not. It's Flavio with an L. And so we've agreed to keep in touch, and hopefully I'll see him again either this time next year or the year after. Either way, we'll see each other within the next 2 to 3 years. But he was just messaging me this morning, and it's always great to have that love, intimate connection, like on another level, to also take me back to Brazil, aside from the academic research I need to finish. On the next slide, you'll see some of that research that I've getting back to. Of course, these are books that I've read, but now I have to go back and read through another lens, now that I've been to these archival sites, now that I've spoken to some of the people, and see how modernity plays out in a lot of these historical texts. I have to write about 5 chapters for my dissertation. So I wrote 3 while I was in Brazil. I'd hoped to write 4, but I wrote 3. And so now I'm spending this time in December and January finishing those last chapters. And come April, I'll do something called defending my dissertation, which means there'll be a community of people who have read my 5 chapters, and then they'll question me on the work, its contribution to academia, my contribution to Black studies as a field, and whatever hope I have after this research was to come of it. So that's my major responsibility right now, is finishing my dissertation writing. So send good energy my way, because I'm definitely going to need it to finish up. This next slide I have is my office space here at Indiana University. As you can see, it's a shared space, so it's not just for me, myself, but it's pretty much where I live now. I usually get to campus at about 6 a.m. every day. Not today, but usually every day I get there about 6 a.m. and I work until about noon or 1 p.m. It's probably going to change a little bit next semester, since I'll also be teaching. So I'll probably work from about 6 a.m. until maybe 11, and then I'll start having my office hours for students before I start teaching at 3 p.m. So that is, I've only been back. Last week I went every day at 6 a.m., but I didn't go yesterday. I didn't go today. So that's also, getting back into the rhythm of things, especially when it's cold and dark outside. But it's the best time of day for me to work, and where I feel the most clear-minded and where I feel the most productive. And then finally, the last slide I have is just a little reminder of a very popular Dr. Seuss book, "Oh, the Places You'll Go." You probably read it in your youth or recently or whatnot. But, throughout the book, it's just encouraging us to explore different places that are going to be challenging, and there are going to be some failures that come along with it. But the joy and wisdom and experience that comes when you take that chance, get out of that comfort zone and be in places that may be, a little overwhelming at first. But when you have that ability to adapt, that capability to go to new places and surroundings and meet people from across the globe, not only does it enrich, your experiences on an individual level, but it enriches everyone's experiences that you come in contact with, because the world, as large as it is, becomes a little bit, united in that kind of humanitarian sort of way, seeing how many things we have in common, seeing how many goals we all share together, and how we can ultimately build better systems once we break down these barriers, once we break down these zones that are unfamiliar to us. So hopefully, if you have a copy of that book, you can go back and read through it or find a copy. I'm sure it's easy to find Dr. Seuss anywhere. And let it just be a little reminder to, explore those places and the importance of using language as a way to connect with people makes it all the more fulfilling. So that's what I experienced in Brazil, and what I encourage you all to experience with your language skills wherever you may travel. So yeah, so thanks so much for that.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Madison. It's great to hear about your return journey, and what great sort of words to inspire us all to go on journeys of our own. I had a quick question for you, and I hope our students who are waiting so patiently at Gothenburg High School are thinking about questions they might want to ask Madison when they get a chance in just a moment. But you were in Brazil for 9 months. It's a long period of time. I look at your luggage and I think, wow, like that's all your stuff for 9 months. That's amazing. That's a whole separate topic. But in 9 months, you really saw a lot of the country of Brazil. You lived in a lot of different living situations. Are there any things that you adapted from Brazilian culture from your time there that you think you will incorporate into your life back in Bloomington and moving forward? Anything that you did and loved and just sort of became a part of you in Brazil that you think will be a part of your life now back in the United States?
Yeah, I don't know how successful this will be, but I always thought that I was a pretty good listener before when I spoke to people and we had conversations. But like even my way of communicating and listening to people now has changed. Like I feel that I have a better sense of, I guess because I was listening to the language so intently to make sure I understood. I think that's also improved things I may have missed listening to people before when it comes to little things like the change in their tone, or like how maybe even like side comments may actually be important comments to the conversation, and bringing that to attention. So that was a very unexpected change that I didn't realize that I need an improvement in, because again, listening skills, I know how to listen to people. And now Brazil has helped me listen to people in a completely different way that I hadn't even realized I was ignoring before. So that is one thing. Also, just the way the way I clean now is a little bit different. Not saying I was dirty. I've always prided myself in keeping things clean, but even different cleaning tools that are used. Squeegees. You see squeegees a lot everywhere in Brazil, like around your sinks and whatnot. And I never really used squeegees before, but they definitely make a difference in making sure everything is not damp. So those are little changes I've noticed. But I'm sure there are other things. I've already had people tell me you've changed in a lot of ways. And when I ask them, like, what do you mean? They never give a clear answer. So I'm still waiting to see what other things I've been modified in since I've come back.
Excellent. Well, I'll save any other questions I have and give our students at Gothenburg a chance to join us here on camera. Hello, everyone. I see some hands up in the back, and if you want to just sort of like decide amongst yourself what order you want to go in, shoot away with questions.
I was just wondering, like, kind of how your research ended, like if you found everything like you went there to look for, or like just kind of how that ended.
Yeah, there's always this there's always this insecurity I have of, did I do enough? Did I get it all? And to be honest, I still have files and paperwork I still have to go through, because there's a lot that I'm still going through. I don't know if my research will ever be like done or finished in a sense, because there's always more we can learn. As far as like getting enough for my dissertation, I'm confident I have enough for that. But I know, because this is my career, I'm going to have to go back, a few more times just to see what else I can add on. Because 9 months is a pretty long time, but I was also in different spots in those 9 months. So I would like to go back, that I'm familiar with how the archives work. Now that I'm familiar with that process and system, I can probably make my time more efficient. But yeah, I got a good bit. Is there another question?
Sorry, Madison, you cut out for just a second there.
Oh no, I'm sorry. Oh, well, yeah, I don't know where I might have cut off, but short answer, yes and no to my research. It's still more to do.
Was there anything that really made
I'm sorry?
you want to take that step out of your comfort zone to go and take this opportunity for your research and your own personal development?
You asked, was there something that motivated me to step out my comfort zone?
Essentially.
I'm sorry, I'm catching bits and pieces.
Yeah, you're right, Madison. Was there anything that made you step out of your comfort zone as part of either your research or your personal life that you're glad you did, that was maybe like scary or intimidating at the time, but you're glad you did?
Yeah. So, and again, apologies for the delay. So I grew up in an environment where I was always encouraged to talk to people, to talk to strangers. And I think because I didn't really have that sort of like fear or shyness, or that kind of being a barrier to connect to, I think that really helped. Oh, wait. It's doing the circles. I don't know if you can hear me. Oh no. Okay, there we go. You're back. I don't know how much we lost there. But because I never really had that kind of shyness about approaching people, I've always been curious about people's lives and people's stories. When I was in my age, but in 2017, I had a chance at a very last minute decision to either stay at the job I was in or go across country to start graduate school in California. So that was a very like last minute decision I had to make on the spot, and I chose to go to California. So I think having that sort of attitude of welcoming, whatever, and being ready to embrace whatever, kind of helped me have that sort of like courage and motivation to go to Brazil for such a long time. I applied for this fellowship, which is a Fulbright fellowship, thinking like, I'll apply, but I probably won't get it. But when I was funded, I was, thrilled. Not only is it going to pay for my expenses to go to Brazil, which is a huge factor in why I was able to go, right? Having those expenses taken care of, but also having that name attached to it. Like, this is a very famous award. I can't turn this down, if I want to achieve these other goals in my life. So having, I guess, that background of being kind of forced into the spotlight when talking to people, having those kind of decision makings in my past of like, you do this now or you lose your chance kind of attitude, and just taking that step with that courage, having that risk behind it. And then like knowing the opportunity I have, and if I didn't take advantage of it, it may not come again. all helps encourage me to like, yes, you can do this. You will have difficulties, but you've had difficulties before in your life and you worked through them and overcame them. So yeah, I just understood that this was something that may not happen. I may not have this chance again. So I'm going to take advantage of it. And again, I hope that answers your question. I didn't catch all of what was in it, but hopefully that covers it.
I see a thumbs up from the back row. All right, excellent. Any other questions? Yeah, please go ahead.
So you mentioned going back to Brazil again. Going back, what would you do differently in like your research, but also in like your stay?
Yeah, so now that I understand how some of the archives work, when I go back, I know how to approach them differently. Initially, I would, send emails to them and being like, "Hi, I'm a student from the U.S. and this is what I'm researching." And I did that in a way because I didn't want to come across as arrogant, right? But I realized that in a lot of spaces in Brazil, you have to kind of throw your credentials around in order to get to certain access to certain places, even though they're public and open to the public, supposedly. A lot of times people like to gatekeep information and prevent access, especially for people who look like me. So in the future, I understand that I need to bring some authority with my emails, saying like, not only am I a U.S. scholar, but I'm a Fulbright scholar. I've done this. I have all this credentials. This, my research is important for this reason. And, denying me access will look like this and blah, blah, blah. So I need to be a little more in depth with my approaches and have a little more firm as to why I'm there. Which again, was hard for me because I didn't want to come across as this arrogant, U.S. scholar demanding access to this Brazilian spaces. But what I learned from some of my mentors in Brazil is that's the approach that has to be taken as far as like these spaces that I'm trying to get access to. I would also prepare better for my interviews. I had two interviews that I actually lost because I thought I had my backup device working. So I had some recorded via Zoom, but I also had some recorded on my little tape player thingy. And I thought that my tape player thingy was working. It was not. And I thought I was recording on Zoom, but it got lost in the Zoom netherworlds. I don't know. So I had to go back and like redo 2 interviews. So I would definitely make sure I have an extra backup and make sure that all my backups are working as interviews are going on. And I think now that I understand a little bit more of how the culture works and how people move around, I think when I do go back, I will feel more comfortable exploring places that I thought I wasn't allowed to be in, as a foreigner, as someone with dark skin, as someone with nappy hair, because these are still high prejudices that exist. But the best way to break these prejudices is to go ahead and live your authentic self. If you have a right to be there, then you can be there. So yeah, it would just be more about the way I carry myself, the way I approach archives, that I think would make my trips a little bit more successful than some spaces I may have felt in before.
All right, great question. Thanks, Madison. Next question, I see a hand raised. Go ahead.
So are you in the same time zone in Brazil? Like, are you jet lagged now that you're back in the U.S.?
Yeah, it's a different time zone. Yeah. So Brazil right now so you all are in Central Time. So Brazil is 3 hours ahead. Yes, because daylight savings, you fell back. So that was really confusing, like daylight savings, because they don't have it in Brazil. Not anymore. They used to, but they don't have it anymore. So when it was like, say, 9 a.m. your time, it would be noon in Brazil. And then when the seasons changed, it would be like 11 a.m. when it's 9 a.m. your time. So that was a little bit confusing for me because I had people in every time zone. that I was communicating with in the United States. I had people in California, people in Colorado, people in Chicago, people in Indiana. So I had people in all these different time zones. So that was really confusing. And even now when I'm back in the States, I look at my computer screen and I say, okay, so 12:39 here, which means it's 2:39 there, which means it's, so that was a little fun kind of math game I had to play every day. But now that I'm back here in the States, it's like, okay, you don't have to think so hard anymore, just 1 hour difference now. So as far as who I need to be talking to.
Yeah, wonderful question. All right, I see another hand. Go ahead.
Do you prefer living in Brazil or the United States?
I don't know where I am with that question just yet, or where I am with that answer, because there are definitely some things I prefer in each than the other. Like, I'm definitely excited for my return back to Brazil whenever that happens. And I could see myself living there maybe when I get older, like in a decade or a couple of decades or so, and living there long term or for the rest of my life. But right now, I do want to stay in the U.S. a little bit longer, but eventually I think I'm going to move there.
All right, excellent. Another hand, go ahead.
I guess I was just wondering what got you interested in your research topic and why you chose that as your topic.
Yeah. So on the PhD level, you have to find some kind of topic in your field and then go into great analysis and depth writing about it. Ideally, new perspectives, a new lens, a new point of view from your research. And I came across this article years ago, like before I even started grad school. Years ago, I came across this article about Confederate families that were living in Brazil, and their heritage and their lineage and their descendants still celebrate this Confederate Day holiday every April. They celebrate Confederate Day. They don't do it anymore. This was the first year they stopped doing it. But up until last year, and in the pandemic, they were celebrating this Confederate Day holiday. And that stuck in my head for a long time, and why I hadn't heard about it, why I hadn't read much about it. And when I got to studying my PhD, that was still in my head. I had this requirement to do a study abroad somewhere. And honestly, I thought I'll just spend, a few months, maybe a semester studying abroad in Brazil about this topic and then come back to the United States. So I thought it was just going to end up being maybe like a term paper. But the more I delved into it and the little that I saw about it when it came to Afro-Brazilians, the more I got invested into wondering, why aren't Afro-Brazilians talking about this? Why don't we see any of their responses to this Confederate migration? So when I didn't see a lot of response or a lot of communication or discussion about Afro-Brazilians, I was like, well, let me start that conversation, right? So this article I read years ago, back when I was living in Alabama, before I started grad school, just kind of stayed in my head all these years until this opportunity came up where I was like, well, you have to study abroad. Well, might as well study this. And then that just matured into this dissertation. But yeah, thankfully, some more people are talking about Afro-Brazilians. Sorry, didn't know we were out of time.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
ahead.
no, so you can keep going there. Go ahead and finish.
Okay, yeah. So just want a lot of Afro-Brazilians in that time period from 1865 to 1915 that was being discussed, particularly with these Confederate families. So that's why I wanted to get that discussion started.
All right, phenomenal question. Students at Gothenburg, anybody else have a burning question for Madison? Hand in the back row, go ahead.
Were you ever able to watch the parade in Rio de Janeiro?
Like the for Carnival?
I don't know. Yeah, that one.
So I didn't watch that one, but there are parades in Sao Paulo that I went to. I didn't think it was appropriate to show those pictures, but I do have some pictures from my time in Sao Paulo and those Carnival parades. And then there were some people who are like live streaming it on the TVs. We could watch it there. But so no, I didn't get to see the big one in Rio, but I saw some other pretty big ones in Sao Paulo.
Excellent. Great. Any other questions? Those questions are phenomenal. I know our friends in Gothenburg are ready to move on to their next class, but one last kind of point, Madison, since this is a language learning class and language has been a big part of your journey to Brazil, I noticed like right away as you started talking that in some cases the first word that came to your mind was Portuguese. And like I could see you thinking about what the English word is. Tell us just a little bit of what it's like to transition back to a place where you're speaking your primary language after having such an immersive language learning experience for 9 months in Brazil.
I keep getting this like ting, like they don't know that word. And it's like, no, Madison, you're in the United States. They do know that word. So like, and I do have those moments where because I've been so familiar just saying certain things that I have to almost retrain my tongue and my lips, and like, don't say like, garrafa de agua. It's, oh no, it's a bottle of water. Not connect, it's a pen. It's, not mace, it's a table. So it's like, you have to, fill out kind of your space where you are, which is kind of the disorienting part of coming back, after living so long abroad. They call it reverse culture shock. So I'm learning. So it's just reminding myself that you are in this space, that it is okay to do this without having that ting, because you're not in Brazil. You are in the United States. It is okay. So just constantly reminding myself that.
Excellent. Does that stir sort of any final questions from Gothenburg, or are we good? We're good. All right. Well, then before you move on to your next class, let's take an opportunity to thank Madison for joining us again today, answering your questions. This has been great. Students, if you need to get on your way to your next class, go ahead. I am just going to share real quick. I'll move you to the background. Thank you, Gothenburg, for joining us today. I hope you have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to share real quick this link. If anybody who's joining us today is ready for their next Reach the World adventure, we can't talk to Madison forever as much as I would love to, but if you go to this link, you can see the library of all the Reach the World virtual exchange expeditions like Madison's. You can choose your next adventure from that list. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Madison, this has been so much fun, and you've made so many wonderful articles on your journey homepage too. I want to make sure that I show that as well. There's that beautiful link. So go check out, if you haven't already, all of Madison's amazing articles from her virtual exchange expedition to Brazil. Madison, it's great to have you back in the United States. It's been so fun learning from you, and really appreciate all the time you've spent with us.
Of course.
Hopefully we see you again soon.
Absolutely. I've thoroughly enjoyed it myself. Thank you.
Excellent. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.